Ladies and gentlemen, coming soon, a podcast you've all been waiting for.
Movie Wire Podcast, talking about movies with Justin Henson.
Wait. And Alex from Talking Smac.
He likes to see movies.
Not the Movie Wire. Talking Smac.
He likes reviewing them.
This is Alex.
Honest reviews, streaming too. He watches everything. It's the Movie Wire Podcast with your host,
Alex from Talking Smac? Yeah?
Justin Henson.
Really? Ready for my verdict? I don't think you are. Talking Smac.
Welcome to this week's edition of the Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. Now, we have a fantastic lineup this week with 3 brand new reviews, all new in theaters, including an early review to a movie that comes out this week, April 28th. Not only that, but we have a very special guest that will be joining me today on the show, that I will introduce in just 1 second. This week on the show, Nat Sweetwater Clifton from the original Harlem Globetrotters makes history in this true story in Sweetwater. Who doesn't love 2 hours of Nazis getting the crap kicked out of them when vengeance is golden? In an early review of Sisu that will be released April 28th. And finally, now I usually don't have a lot of guests on the show, but joining me for the final review is a guest that has been so kind to allow me on his show numerous times, from Avatar: Way of the Water to their Oscar specials. And that's Josh over at the Talking Smac Podcast. Josh, welcome to the Movie Wire. It's absolutely fantastic to have you on the show.
Apologies, but Josh isn't going to be here. It's going to be Alex from Talking Smac.
Alex!
Yeah, sorry about that.
Wait, where's Josh?
He doesn't like horror movies.
Alex, nothing against you, but let me get this straight. So, he invites me on his show. He never shows up to his show. It's always you, and nothing against you. I love you, Alex. But this is my first guest other than Brooklyn on the show.
Well, I don't know how to break it to you, but Josh just doesn't show up very often.
Man, he knows how to play hard to get on podcasts, I swear to God. I love both you and Josh. And we like to give Josh a hard time. We're kind of kidding around here, but we have kind of a thing on the Talking Smac podcast where Josh just doesn't show up sometimes. So we had to bring that over to my show, I think. So I couldn't resist. But I love the fact you came onto my show. So Alex, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We talked about Talking Smac, so tell us about your show before we get into it.
Talking Smac is where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, and comics. We scatter some slice of life stuff in there, and we just try to have a good time and not keep things negative about what we're reviewing. I mean, we do nitpick and stuff like that, but we try to broaden the scope of what's going out there. Recently, we've launched a spinoff called Talking Lasso, where Josh and a friend of his from the UK talk about Ted Lasso, which I hear is fantastic, but I don't have Apple Plus. But it's overall, if you want to have a good time, Josh is normally the host. Otherwise, I pitch in now and then, and we just try to keep up with pop culture and keep things light.
It's a fantastic show. You guys and your guests present really engaging content and topics. It's one of my go-tos each week. Not only me, but your shows have always had a vast audience. You always talk about something at some point to really tap into the audience of just everybody. I've always loved that about your show, and I've always loved guesting on your show to kind of geek out about movies and stuff like that. I think everybody should take a listen to it. It's a fantastic show. I love it.
Well, thank you. And we love your show. Your weekly reviews are something that we look forward to. And I'm excited to be here and, co-host a review.
That's awesome. Thank you. It's an honor to have you as one of the first guests of the show. So welcome, welcome, welcome. So with that said, we still have one more movie to introduce, and I think it's only right that you finish us off with the final review introduction. You down for that?
Of course I am.
All right. Let's have it.
A mother's love is everything until she is possessed by a demon, finds household items to try and kill you in the most gruesome, brutal ways during a power outage in the new entry to the Evil Dead story in Evil Dead Rise. Are you ready for our verdict? Well, let's get into it.
Out of the windows, what? A roar and a burst of flame. The Movie Wire podcast. With just you need people like me. The podcast for hot and trending movies. The Wire.
And here we go.
When an ex-soldier who discovers gold in the Lapland wilderness tries to take the loot into the city, Nazi soldiers led by a brutal SS officer tries to stop him and take the riches for himself in the new action epic and early review of Sisu.
Probably the earliest influence for this is First Blood, and I always wanted to do an action movie in wilderness of one man surviving against all odds. And that's basically the beginning of the thing, and then I realized that we had a gold rush in Finland in 40s, and we also had some Nazis in Lapland at that time. So combine those two, and you get a hell of a fight.
Get down on your knees. Fuck him up! We got gold!
He was a Finnish commando. Lost his home and his family in the war. He became a one-man death squad. He's one mean motherfucker that you do not want to mess with. Fire!
You'll see what happens when you take everything from him.
Do you really believe that he's immortal?
No, he just refuses to die.
How many mines did we bury here?
All of them.
You? And you?
This is not about who's the strongest. This is about not giving up. We have a word for that in Finland.
Sisu! We might have a problem.
Now, there is nothing more crowd-pleasing than seeing Nazis get defeated in the most various, over-the-top, and brutal ways imaginable. And that's exactly what we get in the new Jalmari Helander film, Sisu. Now, here's what I love about our Finland director, Helander, is when he goes all in with his ideas and films, he goes all in, especially when it comes to the over-the-top with his story ideas and direction. I was first introduced to this filmmaker in 2010's Rare Exports, where while watching, I slipped out a what? Followed by a big smile ear to ear. And Helander didn't disappoint when he made 2014's film Big Game, bringing in Samuel L. Jackson into his storytelling. Both of these films have a sense of linger in your mind in its own unique way, and is a prime example of committing to your story and not steering off course. Now comes Sisu, and even though this is a new type of movie for Helander, he doesn't hinder on his over-the-top vision, and this is his most gruesome, crowd-pleasing, over-the-top film to date. Even though the screenplay had to have only had at max 15 pages to its name, it does not lack in the entertainment value, and it commands the attention to the audience. Helander brings out his inner Tarantino in this film, but the style goes for more of a 70s gritty tone. The story isn't complicated here. It's a survival story with a mix of revenge, where we take our main character, Adami Korpi, played by Jorma Tommila, who strikes gold during World War II and has to travel a far distance to cash in. While doing so, he runs into a company of Nazis led by Bruno Heldorf, played by Axel Henny, who is after Korpi's gold. And of course, if you are a horrible, disgusting group like the Nazis and you take a man's gold, you can expect some big, bold, and bloody body counts. Now, without a lot of dialogue, where the film makes up for it is in its visually exciting environment and smart use of camera shots, with an intelligent balance of wide-angle shots to give the sense of seclusion with a nearby enemy on your tail, but generous close-up shots to tell us what the gold miner and Nazi killer want us to know about him. With only Tommila and shots at time, he is not just the main focus. My eyes started to really take in the environment in which he was in. This is also thanks to our cinematographer Kel Lageros, who does a brilliant job utilizing the environment to give us that spaghetti western gritty look and feel. The film also takes its time, and it isn't just pure action. Highlander just doesn't load us with a bunch of action and kills. He ensures that our main character gets that much needed screen time to focus on his actions and facial expressions so the audience can really connect with them. There are times we don't feel a full connection with our main character, but for relying on complete silence from Tommila, it is a completely admirable job. There are more wins with these scenes than opportunities when it comes to connecting to the audience, but you can tell the filmmakers also relied heavily on the crowd's justified complete hatred towards Nazis, and that helps support our connection with Tommila. With both elements in the mix, it gives the viewer just enough to really rally around Tommila, and in the end, we all know what's going to happen to the Nazis. There should be no surprise here. Even with a juvenile story and an enemy that is predictable and never going their way when it comes to film outcomes, we are still engulfed in our hero's journey. The only thing I wish I would have gotten more of is more from the backstory of Korpi and a little bit bigger of an introduction to the movie, where yes, the film does end up taking its time in the second and third act to really take in his mannerisms. The first act could have spent more time adding more mystery to him to really set the tone for our man we are about to see kick the crap out of an army of Nazis. But the film takes no time at all to rush into the kill scenes. The first act shows almost a lack of confidence in the material and story, where Highlander didn't want to take too much time in the silence to lose the audience. But by the end of the movie, in retrospect, there was enough in style, visuals, and mystery to keep us engaged with Korpi. A build-up of finding the gold would have taken this film to the next level to give an illusion of failure over failure to lead to a brief success, to only have it ripped away. This would have added to the desperation, anger, and motive of Korpi. Instead, we get little tidbits of his past through a little dialogue we see in the movie. That is still interesting and well-paced, but I wanted more from a build-up aspect instead of just being spoon-fed and told. Sisu isn't my favorite Highlander film, but it is a gritty, gruesome, and bloody good time. Especially with the little use of dialogue in the film, it achieves to be one of the best mostly silent films to be an ultimate crowd pleaser, where your mind is set at a crossroads to look at the beautiful visuals on screen or turn your head away from the over-the-top kill scenes. Highlander does it again to create a unique spectacle. I'm giving Sisu 3 stars. Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out my reviews on previous episodes for movies that just became available to rent, buy, and stream now. Now available! Enter the Quantum Realm in Ant-Man and Quantumania, which had a shrinking review of 2.5 stars. 65 million years ago, prehistoric Earth had a visitor in 65, which should have stayed extinct, receiving 1.5 stars. Oh my gods, that didn't take long in theaters. Shazam! Fury of the Gods is now available for streaming in the short-lived theatrical release, which Shazammed its way to 3 stars. And finally, after years of waiting, we go back to Pandora in the James Cameron sequel to the #1 box office smash of all time in Avatar: Way of the Water, which swimmed its way to 3 stars. You can find those reviews on my previous episodes, and just a reminder, if you haven't yet, make sure you hit follow or subscribe. And don't forget to leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. And make sure you follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. Now it's that time of year again in the Seattle area where we have the Snohomish Film Festival. You can now submit your film no matter where you're at by going to www.filmfreeway.com/Snohomish Film Festival. We've had a lot of great talent and a lot of great submissions this year. Do not wait to the last minute. I cannot wait to see your movie. Hall of Famer Nat Sweetwater Clifton makes history as the first African American to sign an NBA contract, forever changing how the game of basketball is played. Based on a true story is Sweetwater.
Nathaniel Clifton, I always known you was born with a higher purpose.
Joe Lapchick.
Nat Clifton. Some call me Sweetwater.
I coach a team called the New York Knickerbockers.
Ain't no Negroes playing your league.
It's not gonna be like that forever.
The NBA champs got their asses kicked by an all-Negro team.
It's like a circus, though. It's Ringling Brothers.
Sweetwater knows this game better than anyone. I will fight for this. I want to fight with you.
Sweetwater, that was your last game wearing a Trotter uniform. Your next game will be in a Knick jersey.
You know you can't play him.
The guy is
the future of the NBA. Change is happening, but I don't know that my city can take it.
This ain't about the color of my skin.
You need to move away from my lily white pumps.
It's about being true to the game of basketball.
It's unnecessary to have all this razzle-dazzle on our courts, and that's what the Negro players will do.
But every time we step on this court, it means something.
You ready to change the game?
Oh, I was born ready.
Now, Sweetwater is based on a true story about Nat Sweetwater Clifton that started with the Harlem Trotters, only to be recruited to the first ever African American to sign with the NBA. Now, usually I would put this film in a category of, I guess it's the thought that counts, but it doesn't fall into that category. It's much, much worse than that, where I couldn't find a single organized thought in this film. And before I really dig into this film, I have to say that you can tell writer and director Martin Guigui has his heart in the right place when writing this film. But from the sporadic history tidbits he inserts, you can tell this is a story that deserves to be told in the right way, with a certain amount of empathy, human elements, historical accuracy, hope, and the intent to teach not only where our history was, but to still encourage a continuation of progression of change, and at the same time to motivate the outcome of a story to positively reinforce what good comes from change in this true story. And I have said it numerous times before on the show, when it comes to movies based on true stories, we ask ourselves, did the film inspire? Did it execute the message it tried to portray to its audience? And did we take something away from what we just watched? The answer is yes. What I took away is hope. The hope that someday someone will remake this story only good. And you know what? I would even settle for a bad version, because that would still be an improvement over Sweetwater. Sweetwater deserved way better than this movie. The cast deserved way better than this movie. Audiences deserved a better telling of the Nat Clifton story. As I stated before, Martin Guigui wrote and directed this dumpster fire of a movie where you don't know what he is going after when it comes to his writing, camera shots, character direction. I can go on. So let's just say almost anything that a director does. He is the Tommy Wiseau of true storytelling. Now, the film is packed full of a cast that is interesting and will pique the interest of many, including Cary Elwes as Ned Irish, owner of Madison Square Garden and the New York Knickerbockers, Jeremy Piven as Joe Lapchick, the coach of the Knickerbockers, Kevin Pollak as the Harlem coach Abe, Richard Dreyfuss as Maurice Podoloff, and of course Everett Osborne as Sweetwater. When it comes to performances, this talented veteran cast looks extremely uncomfortable and at a loss for how to translate the material given into the performance, or even at times confused on the character motivation of how to portray their given characters. The performances come across as they're guesting on Saturday Night Live on a serious story parody, and the camera does not do them any favors either by utilizing a lot of up-close shots that emphasize and focus on their insecure faces. There are scenes that are supposed to be serious, but the acting delivery along with what Guigui decides to focus on is way off course to what I'm sure he thinks is a dramatic piece of gold. And this is where it comes across as so cheesy and laughable, it is hard not to bury our eyes in our hands. And I'm not just talking about one or two scenes, let me be clear. I'm talking about, but rather the entire movie. I felt like I was watching a 2-hour parody of Saturday Night Live. There's even a scene where we have Jeremy Piven, whom most know from comedies, attempt this serious role as a coach. But I will say at times of serious conversation, he did impress me with his energy. But again, he falls into the Gigi curse where the camera is not on his side. The scene I'm referring to is where we see Piven have a conversation about racism with his family, and the camera randomly zooms into a tear on Jeremy Piven's face, with a quick transition to the next scene with no context, no depth, and a very brief, limited conversation. They don't go into depth because it seems like Gigi is very limited on his knowledge of this topic, or he's uncomfortable talking about it. It's like when we talk about the topic of racism and it's uncomfortable to some people and they change the topic to talk about something else. This is not the movie to do that. When you're surrounding an entire movie and your topic is about racism and basketball, you don't avoid it, you zoom in and tackle the topic, which is another problem with this film that I can't place my finger on. The scene transitions are so sporadic and short, like it's horrible editing, and feels like there is missing dialogue, or the dialogue was cut short, or Gigi didn't write enough context to follow a complete thought. Since this happens so often, it points to Gigi as writing his dialogue, but he doesn't follow through and the lines are delivered like the cast is reading the script for the first time and are just cut off. This is where we get the avoidance to the main meat and potatoes of the topic of racism in basketball and racism in society at that time. It's completely avoided except for using slang words that Gigi uses way too often with no context. Gigi either has lines delivered as such or attempts to make every single line delivered as memorable, and you can always tell when Gigi attempts to engage with the audience with what he thinks is a motivational, memorable line because he plays the same damn emotional cinematic music over and over again. He overuses it to the point it makes his true story feel like a soap opera. Sweetwater shows no sense of balance when it comes to the performances and dialogue. When we get to the main focal point of the main points of racism that Gigi attempts, there is no doubt that during this time period, racism is a huge issue, and he goes all in on the heavy use of dialect at that time. And at times it unfortunately feels accurate given the time period, but then at times it feels really out of place, like it's just thrown in just to use it. The other issue we face when it comes to Gigi's narrative is that Gigi uses a lot of camera shots to zoom in on a lot of background characters or sub-characters to give the impression of racism. But these characters never do or speak any lines to demonstrate it. It goes into the active assumption that every character, if it's not the main character on screen, is racist. But with his use of the camera, it is implied from a cornered security guard, a game ref, and any other sub-characters, and we never get clarity if this is due to racism or misappropriate use of the camera, because we get slight moments of confusion of what Gigi is trying to portray, such as the cornered security guard that is implied by the camera he is judging Sweetwater, but then congratulates him on a good game. The camera work here is awful, amateurish, and it doesn't support the narrative. I shouldn't say it doesn't support the narrative because I don't even know what he is going after. When we finally, thank God, get to the climax, the film tries so hard to give kind of that big final game feel as we see Sweetwater in his first NBA game on an all-white team. And it is, again, not earned. If there was a definition, we should rename this movie to unearned emotion. Sweetwater, even with the best intentions at heart, comes across as an emotionally confusing, misguided attempt at a narrative that we all know existed at that time, but adds nothing new to the horrible racism that existed. But even more depressing, it doesn't execute the challenges of Sweetwater by expressing anything of substance. The movie comes across as an 8th grade presentation where the 8th grader is extremely nervous and has to give halts to their thought process. Gigi's dialogue and direction is just that. He can never just focus on one thought. He has to go from scene to scene no matter where we are in the middle of a sentence. It's like having an annoying person just interrupt everything you have to say during a brilliant thought. Some will enjoy this movie as a lot love a feel-good final game where the underdog wins, and more power to them. If some viewers can be inspired by this movie and take something away, then I will call that a win. But may I recommend that this is probably best seen on the small screen, where facial expression, sound, dialogue isn't so promptly seen and can be easily missed. When you see it on a big screen, you can see every single detail, and that's where the movie falls flat. If you can see it on the smallest screen possible to miss all these details, some might enjoy it. Sweetwater is hands down one of the worst movies of the year, and no doubt one of the worst true stories I've seen on the big screen. And most of that is due to part to Martin Gigi's direction and writing that has no clear focus, no clear direction, and is an absolute definition of sloppy storytelling. The story of Nat Clifton is an interesting one and is still a story I would like to see be told. This is one of those rare occasions I will ask and demand for a remake because this story deserves to be told. And the one thing I took away from this film is to avoid at all costs anything written and directed by Martin Gigi. And if you want to see the best thing of the movie, skip the whole damn movie to the credits where you see the real Sweetwater speak. It's more motivational and inspiring than the rest of the entire movie, and it even contradicts the messaging of the film. I'm giving Sweetwater 1 star. Now, one of my favorite things to do is to drop in with one of my favorite cinema shows and podcast host, Antonio, over at the Cult-Worthy Podcast to help cover a set of forgotten films or movies that deserve another watch. This is the first time we are doing a two-parter where we discuss traumatic animated tunes. The first episode to this two-parter is now live. In the first edition of this two-parter, we cover 2 fantastic movies. Make sure you tune in and take a listen to yet another fascinating conversation between the Movie Wire and the Cult-Worthy. It's always a fantastic time on the Cult-Worthy, and make sure you follow or subscribe to his show, the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you know when the second part of this discussion hits. Now let's hear from Antonio now.
The Cult-Worthy Podcast. Join me, Antonio Palacios, each week as I guide you through a never-ending sea of obscure cinema and cult-worthy gems that deserve a rediscovery. Find me on all listening platforms and at thecultworthy.com. The Cult-Worthy Podcast. Join us.
And lastly, you can also listen to my appearance on the wildly entertaining No on 15 podcast, where I join a handful of crossover podcasters and guests, including the Geeky Dad podcast, to have a huge discussion on all things related to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's an extremely fun conversation about the characters we've all grown up with and loved over the years. This episode is also now live. Both of these podcasts are ones not to miss. I will put both of the links to these episodes in the description of this episode. A big thanks to both of these shows for allowing me on these fantastic discussions. Now let's jump right into the Movie Wire and Talking Smack discussion on Evil Dead Rise. A twisted tale of 2 estranged sisters whose reunion is cut short by the rise of flesh-possessing demons, thrusting them into a primal battle for survival as they face the most nightmarish version of family imaginable in Evil Dead Rise.
No matter how busy you ever got, you always found time for me. I can't believe I'm never going to speak to you again.
When I was just a little girl, I asked my mother.
What is this, Danny?
I found it.
Here's what she said to me. It's me. Don't let it take my babies. This is what happened to Paul. It happened to us.
This evil creates terror through total chaos. All you can do is run.
I'm getting this out of here.
You'd be a good mom someday, Honeybath.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, you know how to lie to kids.
it down.
What will be, will be.
Eeny, meeny, miny. You.
Now, many are to wonder, is this a sequel to the 2013 film, a prequel, a spin-off, a reboot? The answer is all of the above in Evil Dead Rise. This acts as a standalone story to the Evil Dead lore with tie-ins to the other films. The movie will definitely appease fans from the franchise and deliver exactly what it promises, from the tradition of the other films to the trailers, and at times it delivers exactly too specifically to what it promises fans, since most of the creepiest scenes we all have seen in the trailer. And the follow-up to these scenes feel very flaccid as an ending result. And those that are not familiar, or this is your first outing to see an Evil Dead movie, these scenes may feel intense. The film delivers this: blood. Lots and lots of blood, in which we would expect from an Evil Dead movie. And at times we see blood randomly thrown in as director Lee Cronin goes through shooting and says, you know what, we haven't had a lot of blood in about 15-20 minutes. Let's just throw some blood on that character. And this is where it's a little bit different compared to the other Evil Dead movies, because there is a rhyme and reason for the most part of how they place their gore. When we get a lot of gory moments, it feels like the film is running a little bit slow, so it's just kind of thrown in. These are the moments in the movie where it feels forced. When we see these scenes with Mother Demon, it feels like the shock factor is held back, which these scenes are hard to watch at times, but it's mostly focused around the idea, and the follow-up is poorly executed with really cut transitions, like the filmmakers are being restrained for showing too much. And we also get a lot of added characters that feels like they're cut short just when we start to enjoy their company on screen. And this is a complete disappointment that the things we do see in trailers, again, are cut short before we even get the chance to really start to enjoy it. But where I do give the film credit is the look and feel of the environment. The pacing of the film is spot on, the gore will satisfy Evil Dead fans, but the characters that steal the most screen time are generically bland with no personality, and the characters that are likable, we want more of, and it limits their screen time. But for a standalone Evil Dead and horror movie, I will give it this: it is memorable for what it is, and it makes for a gory, bloody good time. But just barely. Now, Alex, we stayed pretty quiet on this movie, just saving it for this episode, so what are your thoughts on this?
Evil Dead Rise is the fifth movie, and possibly, as you mentioned, the fourth reboot or remake of the Evil Dead franchise that has spanned now 40 years. We have from comics to video games, crossovers in video games like Dead by Daylight and Fortnite. We even got a 3-season TV series. What I always find interesting about the Evil Dead series is that they never seem to find a tone other than blood and mayhem. But there's consistent threads that link all the movies, where you have the Necronomicon, you have lots of blood and gore, you have the friend who's turning against you, an enemy that no matter how much you hurt always seems to come back for more. What I like about this movie is that they have left behind the cabin in the woods and tried to offer something a little bit new. What I didn't necessarily like about the film is that they felt the need to keep the cast small when they had the intriguing idea of you have an apartment complex full of people and the Necronomicon is. That is where I think the movie struggled against itself, in that they weren't sure if they wanted a one apartment horror movie or they wanted to thread the story into something larger. That being said, I think they found the producers and creators, Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, succeeded in finding another shining star with the director and writer of Lee Cronin and the lead actress of Lily Sullivan. Much like they succeeded in 2013's Evil Dead with Fede Alvarez and Jane Levy, both who have gone on to have continuous careers, power within their own right of sustaining momentum. But I'm not sure if this movie will be able to stand on its own like the 2013 does if there is not a continuation.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point here. So we take the apartment, and I think This one, by the time I was walking out of the movie, I felt it was almost a missed opportunity. One, we see way too much in the trailers versus what we got in the movie. And then you talk about the apartment, which I think it would have been much, much better to have that isolated single apartment versus then vasting out. If they're going to vast out, then they totally need to utilize that environment. And we don't see that really until we get to the climax, which is just a gore fest. But you have some likable characters in this complex that we don't really get to explore. And the movie hints around a lot of these characters and a lot of different subplots that it really doesn't take advantage of. It almost feels like it cuts everything short. But we take, for example, there's a pregnancy in the film that doesn't even feel like it needs to be there. It feels like it's just almost like a cheap shot to give a potential scare. And I think it's kind of a tasteless thing to put in, especially if you don't give any context or show us what you're going to do with it. I much would have rather had that time spent with a lot of the people in the apartment complex that I seem to really enjoy. And then right when we have the characters come out of the apartment and start to explore the outside, it became a little uninteresting to me.
The pregnancy subplot I found vaguely interesting in that it was just a tack on of this is a character who is kind of living this vagabond life as a guitar tech that always comes home when there's problems, and then now she has to step into the role as the problem solver. That's within the trailers. Now, it wasn't interesting in and of itself. You could have just had it be that she had been fired or she needed some downtime, got skimped on some money, something the band's breaking up. There didn't need to be a secondary motivation. Also, as the trailer shows, she's helping and taking care of protecting the kids from the evil mother. And there's a line where Cassie says, you be a good mom, you're good at lying to kids. That just out of itself would have just been a character developing growth moment. What I find most interesting about the movie is that it is the first one that really shows the Necronomicon. There's more than one. That the pages within, rather than just being grotesque pages, are actually manifestations of what is the evil within it. And also that they no longer will contain the evil to just the typical horror movie trope of it's the adults who get in trouble, the kids all survive. That there are other children within the apartment complex that are threatened and handled by the evil. So they were ramping things up in particularly interesting ways. But where I agree with you that it kind of falls apart a little bit is that the ending of the movie gives us a teaser and a promise that there are more Necronomicons out there, that the evil cannot be contained, as we know from Evil Dead 1, 2, and Army of Darkness. Ash never quite wins. Yeah. And this one definitively says that as well, versus the 2013 reboot, remake, continuation, where it just kind of ends with Mia seems to have won. So that is where I find there's a promise that is being made by this movie that needs to be fulfilled for me to consider this movie a true success.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, it feels like a little nugget out of something more that we can get. As a standalone without follow-up, I think it runs a little flat without further explanation or further exploitation, I would say. This one, again, is supposed to be more of a standalone to show kind of the multiple demons, I think is the gist that I got from it. If this was part of, say, a trilogy that was designed, I would be interested to see where it would go. What I will 100% agree on, again, is the design. It is creepy as hell. Whenever we have the creature on screen, it is always an unsettling moment and very tense. I think they did a fantastic job on the design. I think the audio manipulation is really spot on. I think they added really a lot of that fear factor into it, but at times I think it relies too heavy on that. A lot of the torture scenes or the kill scenes, I feel it's a little held back to the shock factor. I think it focuses more on the actual objects of what is going to happen with those objects versus what the ending result is. And that's a new thing that I'm not used to with Evil Dead, is restraining itself. And we do have some really cool kill scenes. We have some really audience-pleasing scenes. But I don't know. I think this one was really restrained. I felt almost cheated by the end of each of the shock factor scenes.
I think they feel flat in particular area. The first movie of this series that I saw was Army of Darkness. In that I was way too young. I was so my youngest aunt is only about 4 years older than me. And I was sent like as 10-year-old to, maybe I was 12, as a chaperone to her on a date with a guy she was going out with, and he picked us up. We went to the movie, went to the rental store. And he's like, "Oh, have you ever seen Army of Darkness?" And we went back to his place. They plopped me down, put this in, and I watched it. And I only vaguely realized that they left during the movie while I was watching it. So I'm a terrible chaperone if anyone needs to know that. But I found it particularly fascinating, and I ended up seeing the second one a few years later. It wasn't until maybe I was 20 that I saw the first one, and I was like, oh my God. They all had a different through line of what they wanted to do. The first one was pure horror. The second one's a balance. The third one is just comedic.
Yeah.
But none of them hold back, especially the 2013 movie, which I still can't see the gore scene with the knife and the bifurcation of the tongue. But the first one is just what they did on no budget, filming out in the middle. Literally, they filmed the first one out in the middle of the woods. And, but this one does seem to hold back in moments of horror. Especially like the trailer shows a cheese grater being used.
Yeah.
And that's basically what we get. We get like that quick shot. You do briefly see some injury, and then immediately it's bandaged. There's some other stuff that happens. There are allusions to other kills within the franchise. The first person who's possessed is always captured, wrapped up by some kind of equipment, stuff like that. But none of them, it's restrained, which is particularly interesting. However, I will say that the part that sticks with me the most, which I think they really, really nailed, is the tension. When they get the vinyls that the Necronomicon is read on, and you see them set it up. This happens in each movie, these vinyls, but there's something rhythmic and beautiful about when they put them on. They're not playing quite right, so you have to put a finger on the vinyl to kind of slow it down, and you're watching the finger move around it as you're hearing the priest speak, and then the Kandarian demon language, and the way that they're moving the hand and stuff is happening in the background is beautifully done, and always drew my attention and always ramped up my fear. That I think was done well. A little bit of it was failing sub.
Yeah, and you brought up the records. I love those scenes too, and I'm glad they put more than just the introduction to the demon in it. I like how we get it multiple times. The more I listened to it, the more I said, I want to see that prequel. I want to see that prequel with the priest. I want to see the origin of that. And I hope we get kind of a spin-off story of that, because this is the first movie where that piece of it really piqued my interest on the background of the lore. I think the records do build a lot of that tension, and I think they were very smart and strategic on where and when they did the records. And I think with the performance of Lily Sullivan, when she is introduced to the records, I think with her subtle performance and calmness, I think it really adds to that tension moment, especially when we see her with the headphones. I think that was really well done. I loved that scene. But yeah, I think I love that aspect of it. When I just brought it up, Lily Sullivan as Beth, I think she absolutely was perfectly cast. I think she stole the show. I love the performance with her. I don't like her character development of where she ended as kind of the Superman concept, where she starts as just this normal person and then she becomes this superhero. I'm on the fence with it because you see that in a lot of the Evil Dead movies, and it almost becomes kind of a piece of fun where we have that normal guy. That I think Lily Sullivan adds to that, but I think as we get into the third act to the climax, I think she's in a crossroads where it's too subtle to be in the tradition of Evil Dead. Not overly done, if that makes sense. So I think the first half with Lily Sullivan, she does a fantastic job, but I think the material given doesn't do her justice in the second half of the movie.
I would agree with that. I enjoyed it, but it's a lesser of the franchise for me. I would probably float it around of the 5 movies, maybe the 4th best of them, which is, none of them are bad.
Yeah.
But this felt like they're trying to start building the map of what they want for a future versus something that can hold its own weight.
Yeah, and I think this will be one of those that if we do get more of the spin-off or standalone stories and they tie it in, it might be a good addition that we see holistically, right?
Oh, certainly. If we get another movie in 2 or 3 years versus the 6th reboot or continuation in 2033. I think that's when we can properly judge this film.
But I will give credit to Lee Cronin on this, where he doesn't kind of ride that sequel boat. Follows the tradition of just these stories that don't necessarily have to follow the same formula. And he makes a standalone movie. And he does that for fans, but also people being introduced to the Evil Dead movies. I mean, you talked about Army of Darkness without seeing any of the other ones. That, again, can be a standalone movie that not only fans will enjoy, but people just walking in as an introduction to Evil Dead. Army of Darkness, to me, is one of my favorites out of the series just because of how bonkers it is. I give them credit for that.
Exactly. I will say, I mentioned it before, but Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell know how to pick people to continue this franchise. And I'm hoping that this is a reinvigoration. That being said, not that it's a spoiler, but I enjoyed the chainsaw scene.
I was wondering how they were going to integrate the chainsaw. It's like, oh, look, a chainsaw.
Exactly. Right next to a very large tree chipper.
And I will give it that. Without giving any spoilers away, I think the climax, was good. I think it was satisfying. But again, I think it falls into that utilizing the environment. And when you see the climax, again, I'm going to try so hard not to give anything away. You can kind of almost fill in the blanks before it happens of what's going to happen instead of following what we had in the previous movies, unpredictable to an extent. But when we place objects that we see previously in the movie, we kind of just start filling in the blanks ourselves. And it's a different in horror movies where we have the moments of silence where the movie leaves us with our imagination. It kind of just spoon feeds us these props and say, oh, got it. Know what's going to happen. Now just give me the blood. Let's speed this along.
Oh, man, I was enjoying the tension of it. I'm starting to think that you're a blood and gore kind of man.
Hey, I love my horror movies. I think horror movies are important. You said you saw Army of Darkness when you were 12, right?
Yep.
Question, I'm going off topic, but I don't care. It's my show.
Exactly.
What was your first horror movie that you can remember? And how old were you?
Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I was 4 or 5. It is, to this day, I am terrified of clowns.
Okay, you're just ruined my point, but we're going to go with it anyway. So, now, did it diminish your love of horror, or did it make it stronger? Did it make you more curious growing up?
Oh, it made me a hell of a lot more curious. I remember, let me see, I remember seeing Nightmare on Elm Street probably 8 or 9, which I absolutely loved. I just found something intriguing and interesting about the concept. I've always been a very vivid dreamer, and something about like being within there and someone being able to manipulate dreams I found interesting. I saw Candyman. Candyman freaked me out. It was probably about 10. That was just like, nope. But I've always been drawn to him. I mean, I was the perfect age for the Nickelodeon. Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Oh, yes.
Like, that was my Saturday night, stay up a little bit late jam of just watching Are You Afraid of the Dark? Yeah, I've always loved horror movies. I'll watch even really bad ones. I was kind of disappointed that in the theater we only got like 2 horror movie trailers, one for The Boogeyman and the other was Talk to Me, I think it was.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It was mostly actually just like Transformers trailers and Fast X, so, my friend who I have a buddy who goes and sees the horror movies with me. Basically, that's like how we catch up every 2 or 3 months. It's like, oh, that looks good. Let's go see that one. But no, what was the first horror movie you saw?
It would have to be, I do, but I'm on the fence on which one came first. Child's Play, because I remember I had the My Buddy doll. I wasn't supposed to watch Child's Play, and my parents didn't know I watched Child's Play, and My Buddy doll was a huge thing back then. So I was gifted a My Buddy doll that traumatized me. My parents at night used to put it, I think, right on the bookshelf, right in front of my bed. And I was not a night person as a kid. And randomly one night, that thing just fell off my bookshelf. At that point, just that simple action of it falling off my bookshelf, I think I didn't sleep for about a week. So that was the last time that doll...
It was after you.
Oh, yeah. I think that was the final pivotal moment. That doll was no longer allowed in the house. And I think that was more for my parents' sake. of them not sleeping after that too. But yeah, I mean, Child's Play, that is a horror movie that, like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, it's those innocent concepts. You take clowns, you take dolls. Those are the most traumatic for kids to go see, but they are the most thrilling and engaging as a kid. No other horror movie, if you pick the right one, will stay with us as adults, other than that first horror movie that really gave us that adrenaline rush, right? And as a kid, we don't know how to handle that adrenaline rush, so it translates into fear. Horror, I think, given the right context and the right dialogue with certain kids, not every kid's the same, but I think it's important to our culture to have these movies. And a lot of people would argue that it's pointless. When I talk horror, I don't mean just mindless killings, right? You have a lot of thrilling movies that really just get into your emotional state that do have points. Horror, I always hated the fact that we take this horror topic and say, this is what horror is. It's a pointless monster. It's a pointless ghost. It's just a lot of blood and gore. Horror isn't generalized into that single category. I mean, we have our Evil Dead, we have our Paranormal Activities, we have our Nightmare on Elm Street and Child's Play, but horror is a generalized genre where we can take a thrilling movie and have it just really attack us in an emotional state. And that's what makes it fun and really important to our culture, is that we have those emotions. It's just like watching a drama that makes you cry. Movies are there to attack our emotional state. And I think every genre has an important message and an important play in movies today.
I agree with that. So when you mentioned that, pointless horror, I would say that Eli Roth's Hostel movies are kind of pointless horror. They were just pain and gore for gore's sake to see what he could get away with an R rating. However, he did a series, I believe a 3-season series called Eli Roth's History of Horror, where he interviewed horror directors about some of their films and also kind of went through each decade of horror and what it meant. And I will say that his ability to interview as a director and his ability to say what horror means and the trends of horror, because you go and you get to like the 50s where communism is a big thing, and all of a sudden we start having like body snatcher horror, where the reason why the horror exists is that we're afraid of what may be. Then you have like the 60s and 70s where zombieism was a big thing because of the consumerism culture that was kind of taking over from the post-war baby booms. But it was also fear that parents were having of counterculture and stuff like that. Then you have late 80s, early 90s, you have zombie movies or infection movies.
Slasher movies.
Slasher movies as explorations of not only suburbia, but you have the fear of sex being imposed because now there's these new diseases that have come that are attacking people that are infesting our bloodstream and killing us very quickly, and we don't know how to combat this. And so you have this, that kind of thing of like fluids hurt us and stuff like that, and the otherism. And I think that is actually very important, that horror can't just be horror, but horror can also be a reflection on the moment, and it can also be a reflection on what we shouldn't be afraid of and how we shouldn't be treating others. That I think is also a very interesting discussion that horror can and should stimulate, versus just the Oscars kind of poo-pooing it and like, well, it wasn't about a takedown on the American culture that is in a very easily digestible manner, something like American Beauty, so we're not going to award it. When actually you can get more out of it. I would say that Jordan Peele's 3 movies that he's done are perfect examples of horror as a topical discussion, but also horror as a cathartic release for an emotional reaction.
Yeah. And you make some great points on that. The one that I usually use an example of for multiple reasons is Paranormal Activity. When you said Oscars, that kind of sparked me, not to say that Paranormal Activity deserved an Oscar, but it is a good example of good filmmaking on a really small budget to really go after that emotional state. It had a tiny budget. It knew how to use practical effects. It knew the emotion piece of it and what it wanted to go for when it comes to fear factor, and that is utilizing the imaginations of the audience to really go after that psyche of fear. I think it was one of the most well executed when it comes to a practical horror movie with no real special effects, and it's just completely character driven. If we take the actual job of horror on what it's trying to do, I think you made a great example on yours, and I also think Paranormal Activity does a fantastic job on what it is intended to have you feel.
I agree with you completely. When I first saw the Paranormal Activity movie, it scared me. We lived in this really old apartment building that was about 80 years old, maybe almost 100. And so it had a lot of quirks to it. It was also very sound didn't travel between the units. Sound laterally, it traveled vertically. And so when we were on the second floor, which is the top floor of the building, and getting home that night from seeing it, and the creaks and the groans all felt different. Mm-hmm. All sounded different. But also that movie, I think, is an interesting topical discussion in that it can actually be a metaphor for dating somebody. What kind of baggage do you not realize they carry with them? What kind of things do you only discover years into a relationship? And using the metaphor of like a new home with somebody that you're bonding your life with, that you financially bonded your life with by buying this house together, but that you may be doing so with marriage and stuff like that, and finding out all these little quirks that you never realized the other person had.
Yeah.
And there's also the fear of what is happening. What is your partner doing while you're asleep?
Yeah, there's just so much to elements that you can actually, and that's the relatability factor. It has something in that movie that multiple people can take out of and make it relatable to the actual subject of fear. I thought it was fantastic. We're going on a kind of a off the rails Evil Dead horror topic. It feels like that should be a completely whole episode by itself.
I love horror, so.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love it. So with that said, Alex, do you want me to give my rating first, or you want to go first?
I'll steal your thunder slightly. All that being said, I'm giving this 3 stars.
I have been teetering and tottering back and forth between 2 ratings. The more I think about it, for all the right reasons, I'm going to say it's barely a pass. I'm giving it 2.5 stars. Last night I had it at 3 and then push it back to 2.5 stars. So a minor pass, very slight.
What I find most interesting about this is that, since I'm coming on the show, I had to sign the release, and also I got the Bible that you have for the show. I didn't realize that we could go up to 100 stars.
What?
Yeah, you have it right there. I listen every week and I'm seeing 3 stars, 2.5 stars, 3.5 stars. You've never given something above a 5, and you have 100 to give.
Okay, in all fairness, the terms and conditions were written at 2:30 a.m. when I was intoxicated.
Makes a lot of sense. There were some typos.
Well, you know what? Skinamarink. That one gets 100 stars in the negatives. So I will check that for you, Alex. And maybe next week I might have 100 star. Who knows? But Evil Dead will not be it, sadly.
Fine.
Alex, I appreciate you coming on the show. Do you have a good time?
I had a fantastic time. Thank you so much for letting me on.
I love it. I loved having you on. You're a fantastic guest. Hopefully we can have you back on again and talk about some more movies. Thank you to Alex at Talking Smac. Say goodbye, Alex.
No, I'm staying. Bye, Justin. Thank you so much.
And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. I also want to give a special thank you to Alex over at Talking Smac for joining me on a fantastic Evil Dead Rise review. You can also show support by following and subscribing the Talking Smac Podcast. And don't forget to follow my show on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. And the last thing before I go, do me a favor, make sure you stay for after the credits to show the respect to those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film, and support your local movie theaters.
A verdict has been made on this episode of The Movie Wire by your host, Justin Henson. He thanks you for listening to the show. You can follow Justin on Instagram and Twitter at MovieWireShow, or visit his website, www.themoviewire.com. Oh, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we will see you at the movies.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.